Kia ora and welcome to our final Sector Report program for 2010. There's been plenty happening in the rural world this year, so we bring you some highlights of the more topical stories we've had for you, and also those that were just plain interesting. First up, in official speak, they're called adverse events, although you and I call them disasters. We had more than our share of those in September. When the North Canterbury quake struck on September the 4th, the mainstream news organisations stuck mostly to Christchurch City. But Sector Report went out to the plains to investigate the rural story around the Darfield epicentre. The quake threw up what's called a scarp that ran right through one farmer's property. Well, if you want a fairly dramatic example of exactly how the earth did move here on the Canterbury Plains, you only have to come here to Brendan Wood's property at Burnham. If you look down that fence line, there it is, straight as a die, typical Canterbury Plains, and it's straight as a die shelter belt. But you'll see there, it suddenly takes a dog leg. And if you pace that out, you see that the entire fence and the rest of the shelter belt has moved holus bolus nearly 4 metres that way. Most farmers escaped the quake unscathed, but some were seriously affected, like those whose 20-plus tonne rotary milking turntables were thrown off their rails and guide wheels. It was a major precision job for engineers to jack them back into place. Farmers met in Darfield for a briefing, particularly on insurance claims. And there are plenty of those, with damage to grain silos, some of them beyond repair. There was serious damage to some homesteads, with the contents flung every which way by the big shake. This more modest house sank half a metre after the Hororata River broke its banks and flooded the farm. The home is now red stickered, although that hasn't stopped the family moving back in. Also in September, disaster of a different sort struck farmers in the North Island. The Manawatu is a wet and windy place at the best of times, but in mid-September the heavens opened and showed they really meant business. 175 millimetres drenched farms on the Manawatu Plains in 2 giant bursts. Marie Davey and husband Kevin farm 160 hectares with 450 cows, about 15 kilometres south of Palmerston North. With major waterways running through their property, they were victims of flooding of biblical proportions, losing about half the farm to the water, for the time being at least. Marie told me their story.
We're the last farm before the water hits the Manawatu. When
Right.
the Manawatu rose, all the floodgates were put on hold.
Right.
All these main tributaries, the Orua, were all backed up.
Yeah. So you saw it just flooding right down here, and then we go underneath this bridge, and then it becomes a spillway, is that right?
Yeah, the main drain reaches the top of the stock banks, and the lower point is the spillway just here.
Yeah.
And once the floodgates were shut, the water just poured into...
So it all just backed up here?
Yeah, backed up,
And what was it, right up to that stock bank there?
flowed over the stock bank.
Wow.
Actually filled this 200-acre basin here with water.
Really? So this relatively green area as well?
Yes, right up to the top of the stock bank. Just beyond that's the Orua River.
Right.
And for as far as you can see, for a fortnight,
Yeah.
that was all underwater. Lapping over the road, the
Right.
stockyards down there, you couldn't
Yeah.
see the top posts.
Good heavens.
Was all underwater. This is half of the farm. We
Yeah.
milk 450 cows here,
Right.
and in effect 200 acres of it was
Yeah.
underwater for 2 weeks.
So how on earth do you recover from this?
Very hard, production dropped, a lot of sacrifices were made. The herd that grazes over here had to come back over the road. ate all the grass that the second herd was meant to get, and of course the rotation's quicker. Supplementary and bought-in feed had to come in, and we basically used the property as a standoff pad.
Right.
There were days we couldn't get on and graze. 2 weeks later, you look at the farm, it's starting to green up, the water's gone. I think out of all this land, we're going to lose just the 2 paddocks. We didn't lose any animals, but we certainly had a lot of downer cows at that time of the year. We're going to see if we can actually pick ourselves up and recoup. You know, what was going to be a record season, even so early this year. I still think we can full steam ahead and get out of this.
But Sector Report has covered much more than doom and disaster. Take this success story in effluent control. Martin Bennett has been farming near Putaruru in the South Waikato for 16 years. In that time, the property's expanded to 136 hectares and his herd has grown from 235 to 400 cows. His sustainable farm on the banks of the Little Waipa River is a casebook study in how to make sure only milk leaves the farm and not the nutrients that can run off it.
When we purchased the farm, it was very much sort of unloved and was in need of a lot of changes, and we had there was a few incentives and a few people that have sort of inspired us to do things on the farm. And since shortly after sort of 96 period, we started planting and fencing off the river and improving the effluent system. And since then it's become a bit of a passion, and we've slowly evolved the farm to a stage where we've got all the main rivers all fenced. We're using nutrient budgets, nutrient management plans, and sort of carefully using the effluent and the nutrients that we've got on the farm to improve the sustainability of the farm. Now, the cost to us has actually been minimal. We've had a lot of the funding has come about through Environment Waikato and the local South Waikato Initiatives Trust. We've funded plants and trees. A lot of the fencing we've funded ourselves, but that's also had a benefit, keeping stock out of waterways and stock losses and things like that.
Despite the efforts of farmers like Martin Bennett, regular tests by Environment Waikato show water quality's still got a way to go before this river not only looks clean and clear, but is actually so.
The general trend, like at the bridge just here where they take Environment Waikato take all the water tests, the trend is still going the wrong way slowly. But I suppose to get it in perspective that we've got a lot of kilometres of river on here, and we've got 1.6k, and there's another more than 20 odd farmers on the river that are actually fencing as well. So it's a long game, not a short game.
23-year-old Matt Kingsland is herd manager on the Bennett property. He manages the spraying of effluent onto pasture, a vital part of his work.
Especially with our surrounds, with the Little Waipa behind us, and with our irrigation, so half our farm is primarily quite moist through the year.
The irrigator moves at a snail's pace across the paddocks, 30 metres a day, and has to be constantly monitored.
Blockages are a big issue with effluent. If you are vigilant and proactive with managing the effluent system, the blockages don't happen as often as they could.
We've come a long way from the days when a dairy farmer simply set up his shed beside a stream or a drain without a thought for the final destination of the waste he hosed out of his yard. But councils are getting tough, and Martin Bennett can see a standoff looming.
Well, it's going to be very contentious, and we're in for a bit of a rough ride, I think, till we work these things out.
So in the eyes of this sustainability pioneer, where do farmers go wrong?
I think the biggest mistake that is being made is people initially not actually understanding the true value of nutrients. And the second thing is that they don't understand the responsibility that they have on farm for those nutrients and how that multiplies and it fits into the big picture and how that adds to a catchment and how they all actually multiply. And we need to get that message out, and maybe that's something we need to do better.
Martin Bennett there with his plan for tackling one of the biggest issues facing dairy farmers, how to control their effluent runoff. Back in a moment with more from Sector Report 2010. One of the big issues for those who farm animals is genetics and what breeds to run. We came across a quirky example, a farmer in the far north who runs the unfashionable shorthorn breed of cattle and swears by them. Shane, who's a successful dairy farmer from just outside Kirikiri in the north, also runs a beef operation and a shorthorn stud, which provides the bulls to tail his dairy herd off.
With the dairy herd of the size that we've got, we were purchasing anything up to 10 bulls a year to tail cows off with and get heifers and calf and that side of it. With the beef operation, we were always trying to select bulls with good birth weights and good weight gains, and quite often the type of bull that we wanted to use to tail the cows off was out of our budget, and to buy 10 bulls and spend $30,000 when you're primarily a dairy farmer was probably the seed that got me into thinking, well, perhaps we should breed our own, and we've just worked on from there.
The Shorthorn is one of the oldest breeds of cattle known to man, but it seems to have fallen out of fashion with the modern farmer.
With these bulls out here, there's basically two different types there. You'll see the big framey fella, big boned. He's close to 70 to 80 kilos heavier than the other three bulls there. The other three bulls are the type of bulls that I would use over the dairy herd. The red one would be ideal to cross with cows such as Ayrshire cross or milking shorthorn. You will get a red calf, quite a desirable sort of calf. The soft roan and the white will give you a blue roan calf, and they're of a moderate size, virtually guarantee no calving trouble. Okay, what we've got here in this paddock here is some crossbred Shorthorn Friesian cross heifers. There's 2 Angus Shorthorn cross heifers and 1 Ayrshire Shorthorn cross heifer, and I've put them in here this morning just as an example of the offspring from that type of bull that we were just looking at.
Shane says many dairy farmers are concerned they wouldn't recognise a crossbred shorthorn calf, but he says they are idiot-proof. One of the greatest challenges in the country is plant pests, and we journeyed into the Southern Alps and discovered one particular challenge which is costing Doc $4 million a year. Mount Cook Station a couple of summers ago, and a spectacular blaze roars out of control in a forest of self-sown wilding pines, Pinus contorta. 800 hectares of these weed trees went up in smoke after a hot chainsaw was placed on dry summer grass. You'd think the destruction of such a large stand of these pest trees would be a blessing in disguise. The trouble is, the heat opens the cones, which then release seeds to spread further infestations. The forest was also a safari park used for hunting elk in the main, and all up, the blaze cost $850,000. Instead of fire as the means of destruction for wilding pines, just south of Mount Cook to the east of Lake Pukaki, dock staff and contractors are hard at work for much of the year as helicopters drop them into remote areas to chop out wilding pines one by one. This area close to Arthur's Pass is a prime example of the spread of wilding pines. The main species by far is Pinus contorta, as the name suggests, a tree whose branches entwine with those of their neighbours, making for an impenetrable tangle. Also growing wild and marching across the landscape, other pest conifers are Douglas firs and Corsican pine. So how does Doc control these invaders?
Wilding pine control is a real case of a stitch in time save 9. So we ideally try and get in when infestations are just getting a hold, and deal with seedlings and trees when they're small. So physical control, loppers, hand saws, hatchets. Very important in cutting down wilding pines to take all green needles off stems, because a lot of these species will regrow from stumps quite readily.
Right.
When they get bigger and take more of a hold, it's chainsaw control, taking out stands. So we'll do that with our own staff and with contractors. And now there's more work going on in establishing good herbicide mix for either application on the ground or from the air as well.
These wilding pines got here thanks to a well-intentioned forestry experiment. The aim was to find out what varieties were best suited for planting, but the trees got out of control and to turn the Southern Alps into a facsimile of European or North American mountain country. Another problem with wilding pines is that the chances of harvesting commercially are very low, particularly in the South Island.
In parts of New Zealand they are harvested, but certainly in the South Island there's nothing that's commercially harvestable because of the difficulty in getting to it and the quality, or lack thereof, of the timber. So it's just not economic.
As for the chances of total eradication, well, it might happen in a few areas, but most of these infestations of wilding pine, well, it's a matter of managing them and keeping their unwanted presence to a minimum. All Doc can do is come back in a few years and chop them out yet again. There's another pest for farmers in South Canterbury, only these ones are made of metal. Farmers want compensation for the inconvenience these pylons cause, but with no success yet. In a field near Temuka, South Canterbury, a combine harvester plays tag with a towering steel pylon.
And basically it's a David and Goliath battle, really.
This is David Moore, whose family has farmed crops in the area for several generations. David is co-chairman of the South Canterbury Pylon Action Group, an association of 50 farmer members who, for the past 4 years, have been trying to get what they see as fair compensation for the inconvenience of having pylons on their farmland. And this is a graphic illustration of inconvenience.
We're demonstrating that modern machinery is getting bigger by the day.
The pylons run diagonally across the field instead of down the sides. These days, every metre of it is precious, but the only stuff that can grow under these pylons is barley grass and weeds. Every manoeuvre slows up productivity and damages crops.
Every day they're just an imposition for us, really.
2 years ago, Patrick Strange, the newly appointed CEO of Transpower, was invited to this very field to watch a similar demonstration with a 24-metre sprayer.
So like every Transpower representative before and after they came, they saw and they ignored.
In fact, David claims there have been around 20 meetings thus far.
We've expressed those frustrations to Transpower at the highest level. We've met with the chairman of the board, the CEO, and they just don't want to know, quite frankly. And we've had one concession, and that is a sunset clause in the easement agreement, which Transpower have taken up, but apart from that it's been fruitless.
The 4-year campaign has been masterminded from this bunker, the old snooker room at David's historic farmhouse.
Oh, that's all Transpower crap. I've got bloody files of it everywhere. Transpower are very keen to hide behind various acts of parliament, and basically it's a David and Goliath battle, really, because in a sense we're taking on the crown. The pylons were erected before I was born, in fact, and they were constructed in an age when the particular entity that constructed the line, the State Hydro Department, had no profit motive whatsoever. They were there for the national good, and we treated them as such. But now that organisations such as Transpower are profit orientated, having to pay tax and a dividend to the Crown, we see it as a money-making venture.
Plant pests and pylons end that part of our program. Back in a moment when we switch our attention to horticulture. Welcome back. When the horticulture industry had its annual conference in Auckland last winter, grower and consultant Gareth Holder won the coveted Young Grower of the Year award. We paid a visit to Gareth in Hawke's Bay, where he was helping a client improve his soil, his pasture, and therefore the health of his animals, with a carefully designed mix of nutrients. After his triumph in Auckland, we joined Gareth on his home turf in the heart of Hawke's Bay, where he works as a consultant for Abron, specialising in soil health and nutrition. At this 200-hectare sheep and beef property on the edge of the Heretaunga Plains, Gareth has a client he's advising on how to administer the best mixture to feed his grass and improve the soil. And it's an impressive operation to watch. Two men fill a large barrel with finely ground lime, trace elements and water. That slurry goes into a white hopper, which is taken to the landing area and emptied into hovering pilot Mark Williams's stainless steel hopper, not unlike a monsoon bucket. That's hoisted aloft and its load sprayed on pasture with a motor-driven spreader.
What we're doing is a lime slurry mix, so we're using fine lime and we're mixing into that minerals that are actually was needed for the farm from the soil tests that we've been doing and the on-farm assessment, which is also looking at the budget that the farmer's able to spend, and we're putting together the best bang for his buck. We use this machinery here, which is actually dissolving and grinding up all the minerals to get them in a very fine form, which means they are a lot more plant available very quickly, and we see better, quicker responses than your typical solid fertilisers. It's 80% mix of the lime and the minerals, and then we just add 20% water into the mix, and that's purely there to be able to get the minerals to come down to the ground. It's purely for gravity purposes.
This is all about nutrition for better pasture and, down the line, better animals. But is it hard to convince farmers to invest in what are really custom-designed applications to improve their soil health?
Certainly in the slurry form, the results in the field are very quick. It doesn't take long, and with the monitoring that we do, we start to get some objective data there that we can actually say, here's where we started today, here we are in 3 months' time, and we continue that process. And it's not a silver bullet solution. You know, it does take 2 to 3 years to get that right and get it all working the way we want it to be here.
Just down the road, Gareth visits another client whose huge asparagus patch needs a kick along from one of his nutritious designer brews. It needs to happen at this time of year, just before the spears peak up and harvest begins.
We're very close to asparagus harvesting season, so we needed to get a fertiliser, a nutrition blend on, which was going to become available very quickly for the asparagus to take in. So we're getting a good level of calcium into the diet, but also we're actually inoculating the soil with some fresh biology in the form of fungi and bacteria. And what we're also trying to do is accelerate the breakdown of all the fern that the growers mowed down during the winter. So we want to digest all that organic matter and return all the minerals out of that back into the soil as well.
Proposals for wind farms at various sites on rural land around the country have roused emotions, with rural people divided over the virtues, or lack of them, of these giant towers. Sector Report went to the Manawatu for a close-up look.
Some of the large three-bladed ones are causing some grief to some of the people who live very close to them. They're claiming things that are about their animals being affected, production of milk being affected, vibration in their houses.
I like to open my window in the morning, pull the curtains and look at those turbines and say, oh well, which way's the wind going for a starter? And
the noise doesn't bother you?
No, it doesn't.
Talk to a Manawatu farmer and you'll find there's an opinion, one way or the other, on the wind turbines dotted over the hills. If you venture into the hill country on either side of the Manawatu Gorge, the beginnings of the Tararua and Ruahine ranges, this is what you're likely to hear: the hum of 2 or 3-bladed giant propellers mounted atop towering pylons. Little wonder they're there. You're guaranteed a good blow almost every day of the year up here. The wind farms are generally popular with the people of the Manawatu, despite the views of those against because of what's seen as visual pollution along the hilltops and because of the noise the giant blades make. Farmers get paid handsomely for those wind turbines to go on their land, a different case for pylons, it seems. Well, that's our final show for what has been a very busy 2010. Farmers don't get much of a break over the summer when the rest of us are chilling out, but we'll be thinking of you here at Country 99 TV. We'll be back with a fresh series of Sector Report in February, and in the meantime, check out our highlights from the year's programs over the break. A Merry Christmas to you all and a prosperous New Year.